and welcome to our first research conversation for this academic year. First, I want to say a big thank you to Laura and AJ Rod, who have worked very hard behind the scenes, working with me to put the research conversations together. I also want to say a big thank you to everyone for being here this afternoon. It's a great pleasure to introduce Dr. Roth McDuffie to you all. Amy is very well known. Our speaker today is not just only a colleague to many of us, she's also a friend and a mentor to many of us in the College of Education. Dr. McDuffie is a professor of math education in the Department of Teaching and Learning. She will be sharing her research foci across over 20 years in higher education, along with how our interests have developed and shifted over the years. Amy conducts research on the professional development of prospective and practicing teachers in mathematics education. More specifically, she focuses on supporting teachers' learning and development in the areas of equitable instructional practices and teachers' use of curriculum resources. Amy regularly teaches methods of teaching math for undergraduate prospective teachers. She also teaches graduate level courses in math education, as well as qualitative research methods for doctoral students in the College of Education. Amy has received numerous funding from the National Science Foundation for multiple projects, as well as from foundations for other projects. Our newest project, which was funded, began in August. She's serving as a principal investigator on a multi-university NSF-funded project entitled Quantifying Curricular Reasoning as a Critical Practice in Mathematics Teaching. We can't have a better person starting the research conversation this academic year than Amy. Please join me in welcoming Amy to this platform this afternoon. Thank you, Amy. Over to you.
Thank you, Shola and Laura and AG for contacting me and giving me this opportunity. And I'm honored to have so many folks here. Everybody's picture keeps getting smaller, of course, as more and more people come on, and that's a great compliment to me that folks might want to take some time to listen to this. I hope it's worth your time. So yeah, when Shola and Laura asked me would I be willing to speak, I thought about, I could speak about my most recent project, but I think I'm in a smaller and smaller club of senior folks who've been doing this a really long time. So I thought, given that club is smaller and smaller, maybe I could offer something that that only a few of us could right now, and that's sort of a retrospective look across, and as Shola mentioned, over 20 years really, as a researcher in education. And I've actually been in education since an undergraduate when I was preparing to become a teacher, and I started student teaching at 21 and teaching at 22. So it's, one could argue I really started when I started tutoring math in junior high, because I preferred to tutor math than to babysit. So the writing was all on the wall even then. So anyway, this is kind of a meta level look. I'm gonna do a quick description of some of the key NSF projects in particular. I have a lot of folks ask me, how do you build a research agenda? How do you change and evolve? How do you find collaborators to work with and find projects to keep things interesting? So with those kinds of questions in mind, I created this set of slides, and any one project isn't going to get a lot of time, but I hope to have plenty of time for questions. So I'm happy to go back to any of these projects if anyone wants more details on the specifics of anything along the way. So one of the things that I see a number of doctoral students on here too, and that's wonderful. And one of the things we talk about with our doctoral students is what's your elevator speech? What's your 1 or 2 minute description or 1 or 2 sentence description of your work and your professional identity and what you do? And so I thought I would give you mine and sort of show you how it's evolved. And this first part, and Shola actually read it, I believe, to show you that really does match with what I'm showing you here. But this first part, you see the word cloud there for professional development and things associated with it. And I came out of graduate school, and I'm not going back as far as my dissertation research, but if someone wants to ask, we can talk about that too. I finished my PhD in 1998, and I'm now of the age that some of my graduate students weren't born yet. So that's always fun to hear. But at that point, I describe my work as I teach and conduct research with both prospective and practicing teachers, focusing on the professional development of teachers in mathematics education. And that's a big world, but in part that's sort of where we were as a field, that would be sort of specific enough at the time. And that's really how I defined myself coming into my career. And then about 15 years ago, I started layering on a little bit more specificity in 2 areas. And that's where you see the second part and the second word cloud for equity, diversion, inclusion, and certainly racial and social justice, where I add specifically, I investigate supports and barriers to teachers' learning in and from practice. And it was, at that point I said, I really want to work with teachers rather than doing studies on teachers. And I took sort of stock of the kind of work I was doing, and it was in classrooms with teachers, offering professional development with teachers and looking at the learning in and around their practice. And then I also, so that was one way I defined it or focused it. And then I also found what was really productive is using teachers' work with curriculum as a means for learning. And I found that using curriculum in particular not only supported their learning in the moment, it tended to promote generative learning across a career. And in mathematics in particular, and not all areas of teaching and learning are what I claim this for, but in mathematics in particular, we use curriculum materials heavily. And in fact, there's quite a bit of research that says if you have good curriculum materials, teaching is more effective and students learn and achieve more with good materials and teachers knowing how to use them. So that's how those areas sort of started coming together. And then the other part was this focus on equitable pedagogies, really paying attention to diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. And that came about because about that time I was, a few years into my career, and I started having students, they finish our program, a pre-service teacher program, they go out into schools. And at this time I was teaching, I was at the Tri-Cities campus, and a lot of our students would go to Pasco and Kennewick and Richland, and I'd run into them later. And I'd say, so how's it going? And I would hear things back from early career teachers. It's really hard. So, yeah, teaching's hard. Well, you don't understand. It's really hard because I'm teaching students who have nothing. They have no support at home. And they don't speak English well enough to learn. And it's an uphill battle. And I was taken aback because it was filled with this deficit language and a very self-centered view on what it means to have support and not have support from a single cultural perspective. And basically it was students comparing my former students, comparing their students with their lives and determining these children had nothing. And I thought, I don't talk that way in my class. How are they getting out into the field? And I knew that wasn't happening in our program at Tri-Cities and in other classes. And then, you know, they were taking the multicultural education courses at the time and everything else. And I didn't want to go deficit on my students of look at what's wrong with them, right? Or former students. And so instead I looked in the mirror and I said, it's not enough for other programs or courses to take on these issues of equity. I need to be more explicit about it. And I need to help name deficit language and help name implicit bias or outright racism while we're learning about teaching and learning math, and help expose injustices and inequities that actually happen in the teaching and learning math. And in many ways, math can propagate some of those injustices. So that was a pretty big turning point. And around that same time, I had colleagues getting together around this but And you'll see that's where one of my projects really got started. And it was really a readiness for me. But it also was listening to my own students and thinking about how did we get there, and opportunities at the same time that were coming my way. But I had to be aware and looking for these opportunities. And then the most recent, I'd say, shift is this one that I'd only add on in the last couple of years. And I see Dave's here, and Dave's part of this last one very much with me. I also research university practices that support or impede the process of becoming a teacher. And this is the latest grant that Dave Slavitt and I are on. And I'm adding, including structural factors such as institutionalized racism. And that last phrase is basically what got me interested in joining the current research team, even though that's not front and center on the project as it's funded. And I can talk a little bit about that later too, that oftentimes opportunities might not on the surface perfectly align with your interests, but if you see places that you can make room for your interests, if you've got a lot of funding, you can go beyond what they're funding you to do, because that funding, you know, you still have to meet the goals of the funding, but it often leaves room for you to explore a little bit more widely than you might be proposing. So look for these themes as we go through the next few slides on the projects. And I'm hoping that you'll see that it's not just about the projects, but about the twists and turns and how things evolve. So early career work, this is really for the most part before I had funding. And there might have been little like private funding or little pockets here and there, certainly faculty seed money I had for a lower level, but it's basically I had to find the room. And so this is sort of graduate school students and early career folks in mind too. You need to build a record to get funding. You don't tend to get funding without somewhat of a record. And so I looked for opportunities that I could do it in ways that dovetailed with my work. And again, I was interested in supporting teachers' professional learning in practice. And so this one I really liked because it wasn't technically a research study, but it was a collaborative opportunity. And this was a highly respected practitioner journal for teachers at the time. And I wrote this with Terry Young, a colleague at Tri-Cities that some of you may still remember, And it was really, he had a lot of expertise in children's literature. He was that was his focus. And I really wanted to work more on math discourse. So we wrote that together. No funding there. It was combining our ideas and our expertise. And then the second one that I'm featuring here was again early, and this is post-dissertation. I published for my dissertation too, but this is now that I'm forming my own line outside of my doctoral work. And this was an article I really remember when I found out that it got accepted, truly running down the hall on the Tri-Cities campus. And waiving the acceptance letter because they still came as letters at the time. Anyone else remember that? That we actually received letters in the mail? And this one, again, I didn't have funding for it, but I was supervising some student teachers at the time who were teaching math as part of their load. They were elementary teachers. And I thought, I'm in here observing all the time. I'll get an IRB and make this data and see what happens over the semester that they're student teaching. And it turned out to be a really fun project and published in a high-ranking journal in Math Ed. And then this is the project that I told you about that came at that turning point when I really started focusing on equity more. And this was called Teachers Empowered to Advance Change in Mathematics. We called it Teach Math for short. And one of the things I wanted to highlight about this, we probably had, I didn't count, I could have counted to prepare for this, but about 20 publications from this in the form of articles or book chapters. And I don't even know how many presentations. Well into the 30s, maybe into the 40s. And then the book that you see the book cover there for Transforming Mathematics Teacher Education, an equity-based approach. And it was this group of us that said, let's look at how we're teaching the elementary math methods course, the course that Johanna I saw is on here. She's teaching right now. And let's research what we're doing here. So in a way, it was an action research project. We didn't call it that to NSF because it probably wouldn't have been funded if we called it action research to NSF at the time. But it was a collaborative action research project. And notice there, I say the work started in 2009. And then I even say 2006 with a question mark. We actually had a first meeting. It was at Iowa State University, and those folks invited a small group of us who were teaching elementary math methods and really interested in equity together. I think there may have been 30 at that meeting. And we started talking about what we were doing, what we're interested in, and how many of us might be willing to continue the conversation and work and even submit a proposal. That work was going, and conversation was going on for 3 years before, actually 2 years, we submitted a proposal, it didn't get funded. And then we resubmitted and it got funded. And the work actually then started in 2010. The proposal writing started in early 2009. The story there is you don't just write a proposal and get funded, or write a proposal and not get funded and quit and move on. You have to persevere and build these relationships over time. And it's the ones that really go somewhere are the ones usually that have really been built carefully with collaborators. The second thing is, I don't think you can memorize all the names of the collaborators there, but you're going to see many of those names again as I move on to another one. Second project is developing principles for mathematics curriculum design and use in the Common Core era. The work started on this with Corey Drake, is someone who appeared in both. She and I had been working together on the prior project, and she started talking to Jeff, who you see listed there, about submitting a proposal about curriculum use right around the time that the Common Core came out. We got funded on this one on our first try because our timing was really good. The Common Core had just come out. It says the Common Core came out in 2010. We submitted the proposal in 2011, and then often your funding starts in the next calendar year. So we had good timing and a proposal ready to go before other people did related to the Common Core. So even though that proposal was, I would say, probably the worst one I've ever submitted, it was funded because they really wanted to fund in that area at the time of Common Core, and they were willing to work with us more. And the other thing is all of us had prior funding. So we were a pretty good bet in their investment. They knew we could do the work. And the message to take away from that is if you don't have prior funding, try and collaborate with someone who does. As Shola and Laura have worked with folks on the early career proposals, those are targeted for new people only to try and balance out this, this thing of, well, if it's only those who are funded get more funding, they have the separate programs to try and create more opportunities that way. But if you're not applying to early career, they're giving folks millions of dollars. They don't want to invest and take a chance on work that's not going to happen. And so really find ways to collaborate with people who are already funded. For example, Jeff there, John, who's on that project, didn't have prior funding, but he was with a group of people who did. So that got him started. The third project is mathematical modeling. This one was truly a spin-off of the Teach Math project. So you can see how these things grow and build. And we had a lot of success with that Teach Math project. And we talked to program officers and they said they would be interested in funding something, but they're not going to just fund more of the same. So you can't just say, I want to do the same thing longer in NSF. In most cases, they're not going to say, oh, sure. You need to say, what are you going to do new and different to really build off of it? So what we did is we maintained our focus on equity, on children's funds of knowledge and children's community contexts, but now we're doing it with practicing teachers instead of pre-service teachers. And in this special content area of mathematical modeling, which was a new area to the Common Core standards, and most elementary teachers who were out there did not have a chance to learn about mathematical modeling in their own preparation. And yet they're expected to introduce kids to ideas about mathematical modeling as early as kindergarten. And so the field was saying, okay, there's a call for this. There's some things going on in Europe with it. There's a little bit going on in Australia with it, but we haven't made sense of it in the US. And how are we going to do this? So again, we hit a need at a time, but we also had the momentum of the prior project, yet we were redefining a new area. And if you're tracking the collaborators here, that entire group was a subset of the Teach Math group. So it was the same group doing more work. I am listing some RAs along the way, and Candace, I love to see, is here today, and she worked as an RA on that project. And you might notice those, think about how many graduate students got funding, which means they got their tuition covered and a stipend, and often for more than 1 year. Project 4, this is the one with Dave, and we're in year 3 right now of this, just starting year 3. This was the big turn, and this was that third area that I listed on how I define myself, because this took the work. Before, all the work has been with teachers in classrooms or with pre-service teachers. This one takes it at this higher level of what's going on in institutions with math and science teacher preparation. And our collaborators here, Dan Goldhaber and Roddy Theobald in particular, had been doing work in this arena for a long time, really looking at, they call it the teacher pipeline. I keep trying to get them to switch their language and not have pipeline language, but I'm going to say teacher pathway. And they looked at a lot of, teachers exiting pre-service programs, going on to become teachers in the field, and what contributes to success and what can we learn from things. And they said they wanted to back it up because one of the key gatekeepers is universities and who we decide to accept and admit, and retention, keep in our programs, and who we say no to. And Tarek Akmal was approached by Dan Goldhaber and said, hey, will you work with us on this? And Tarek said, I've got 2 people who would be helpful to you. I can't, and made that happen. So again, on the meta level, often your colleagues can refer you to other people to help build these networks and collaborations. and we're doing some interesting things. As I mentioned at the beginning, what you don't see on this project level slide is my particular interest in this, and that is a focus on, you know, are there institutional structural barriers, especially to diverse students, students of color, because we know diverse students and students of color are underrepresented in pre-service teacher education and in teaching. And could we as universities be part of the problem? And this isn't just a study at WSU, we're looking at other universities. You see Candace's name there again. Thank you, Candace, for joining this one. And actually, I should also mention, I didn't put it on the slide, but right now I'm honored to be the Boeing Distinguished Professor for the College of Ed. And that's helping sort of supplement the diversity interest of mine in this particular project. That's funding that part of that interest. And Candace is working with me on that. And you see other Nicole Griggs, some of you might know, and Melissa Percy have been working on this at different times. And then the fifth project is quantifying curricular reasoning as a critical practice. This one just started in August, and Shola mentioned this in the introduction. And there I said the work started in 2020. This is one that we submitted, and Laura helped us with both versions of this. We've submitted it a first time in 2020, fall of 2020. It was not funded. And so we took the feedback, we regrouped, we recrafted it and submitted it again in fall of 21. And then it was funded for this year. But then I said the work started in 2016, in 2009. And the reason for that is, again, to give you the history and how these things develop. I'd done some work, not funded work, just work with classroom teachers, and published a paper back in 2009 where I developed this construct of curricular reasoning. And there's a bit of a figure of what it is. And again, these details aren't that important for this talk in particular. I can talk about it if you want to later, but basically the short version is it's how teachers think about and work with their curriculum, their students, and the math content in practice. And again, that should sort of fit with the kinds of things I've said I've been interested in. I published that in 2009. The collaborators here, especially Dawn, Shannon, and Travis, took up that idea and wrote a proposal and got an NSF-funded project for, I believe, 4 years to really develop what I'd started as curricular reasoning and say, you know, looking at teachers, what does that entail? What does it look like in practice across a wide range of teachers? And they said, would you be on our advisory board for that project, since I was someone who was behind this idea? And I said yes, and I served on their advisory board for 4 years. And then they said, well, we're ready to write a second proposal. And this time, now that we have really developed these constructs, we want to develop measures for measuring it in the field. One is the survey that teachers will take, and another's observation protocol, where we can look at teachers' practice and say, these are the ways that they're reasoning really productively. These are some areas they might want to develop. Well, they invited me to move from advisory board member to PI with them on the second one, and it got funded. So again, there's a story of this evolution of these ideas and how they grow over time. So back to my original, I started on focusing on professional development. I said, I really want to make sure it's in teachers' practice, focusing on their use of curriculum, focusing on equity. And then the recent turn, not the most recent project, but the recent turn was also adding on this higher level look of what's going on at university levels. Oh, I do want to come back to one thing. This newest project doesn't seem to focus equity, but it really does. And that's one of the things I brought to the table when I joined this group. And where it does is when we talk about the learner perspective And that's on one of the edges of the pyramid. And that very much is an equity-based look at what do students bring, what are their strengths, an asset-based perspective on learners. So I'm really kind of thrilled that this 5th project, in my mind, really brings together in many ways things I've been working on my whole career in a really interesting way. And I'm working with absolutely great people. And Tara Heikala, one of our current doc students, is an RA on that project. Okay, so back to here. And that's where I'm going to stop and leave time for questions. And I can pull it back to anything if anyone wants to.
Amy, that was great. This is A.G. Rudd. I really appreciate it and just marvel at the continuity of funding that you've had and the interesting projects and how they've evolved. Just going to pick up on one thing. I got a couple other questions I'll ask if there's time. But this whole idea of curricular reasoning, does that have similarity to Lee Schulman's pedagogical content knowledge, which was all the rage when Lee was a professor and AERA president and so forth?
Yes, it absolutely does, because one of the things, so that in the math ed world, people picked up on Schulman's ideas and developed mathematical knowledge for teaching, MKT. But along the way, with all that people did, and that's what in 1986 Harvard Review was, I think that was Schulman's, and he published it another place too, I can't remember, but if any doc students want to look, it's worth looking up because it's really foundational work in the field. But one of the things he talked about there was not just pedagogical content knowledge, but curricular knowledge. And that sort of got left out of a lot of work that followed on. And that's what motivated me. And I cite Schulman in the 2009 paper heavily and make that connection really strongly, that we have this curricular knowledge that, you know, really had a lot of traction. Nobody really picked up on it, but you've got to know what you're teaching in certain ways. And what I built on with that was not just the knowledge, but the thinking that goes with and how you use and apply that knowledge. But yes, thanks, AG.
Thank you.
I usually have to point that out to people, but it's fun that you.
Thank you so very much, Amy. Other questions, please? Well, indeed. Amy, thank you so very much again for this.
I got one, if nobody else does.
Yeah.
I'll try to prime the pump again for my colleagues.
There's one in the chat too.
Oh, okay. Yeah, there's stuff in the chat. Yeah, good. Maybe I can wait and you can answer the one in the chat first, Amy.
James, I could count on you to ask the hard one. How do you work on multiple projects at once? It's really hard. And at one point I had 3 going at once, because I haven't mentioned like the foundation projects or privately funded projects. And at one point, if you checked dates, I had Teach Math going, the curriculum project going, and I had a privately funded project going. And I vowed then I'd never do more than 1 project at once. And I kept that promise for a little while, but as you can see right now, I'm in year 3 of the project with Dave and just starting this project 5. So I've done it to myself again. The problem is you don't control when opportunities come up. I could be better at my refusal skills and say no because I'm committed right now. But it's really hard when really interesting things come your way. And of course, folks who are in on quantitative side tend to do this all of the time because they might be the quantitative methodologist on a bigger project. it's really hard for me to do it because I'm often doing all the data collection in schools, which is really time intensive. If you're interviewing, that's time intensive. And qualitative data analysis is, it's a different kind of time allocation. I'm not going to claim it's harder, easier, longer, shorter than quantitative, but it's really hard to juggle multiple projects at once in the kind of work I do. I would advise against it, but I don't follow my own advice very well.
Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Amy. Amy, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Oh, all right. Thank you so very much for the presentation. I wonder, Amy, if you think back on your career, what would you say, let me just pick three. What would you say are three key factors that have helped you along your journey?
Okay, I'm not rank ordering, but
No.
I would say collaborations are essential, and the way funding goes, especially if you want larger projects right now, but also publishable qualitative data analysis. It's hard to be a single researcher doing qualitative data analysis and get it published at this point too. We tend to want multiple coders. So that's the practical side. But the other side is you need minds on it. I mean, these are NSF used to fund single researcher projects in education. It's rare, and now I think it's early career would probably be the only ones where you see it. And even with early career, they require you to have a really strong advisory board. So basically you have your coaching team there with you. It's almost a single researcher project in name only, but how it runs is very much with others in mind. So it makes the work more fun. It's better work comes out of it. It's sort of what's needed to get published these days. You can't be in all one person can't do it all. The second thing is really taking advantage of the early career funding opportunities or the seed money opportunities. And I've benefited from all of them at the college level. Our university has new faculty seed grants that are now up to about 20,000, aren't they, Shola, for the new faculty seed grants? And of course, Shola and the Research Advisory Committee have internal funds that we give out in a couple of forms. And one of them is that collaborative research form where teams can get together and plan together. So really taking advantage of those early funding opportunities. And then I've always had side projects going that aren't funded at all. And Johanna's worked on one with me that I was working with the school district intensely, and they were paying me as a consultant, but we did not have funding for research. And I said, this is a really good researchable opportunity. Could I collect data as we go, put the IRB through? And that's still to this day. I mean, that's a current project. And that's how I started, as you saw in those first papers that I shared. Johanna's worked on that with me. But she did it sort of on top of some of the other things too. So I couldn't offer an assistantship, but like in our doctoral program, you can take an internship credit to work with somebody on their research, or even 800 credits. If you're really wanting to learn data analysis, you can, and you don't have an opportunity for an RA position, you can do that with a faculty member. And so the third thing I would say, so the first was collaboration. The second was early, seed money opportunity for funding, that any money is helpful. And the third is working in research opportunities with your practice, that you don't have to have funding to do research. There's a lot of things you can do that you just need to see the opportunities. Okay, so Sarah had asked,
Okay.
oh, sorry.
Thank you, Amy. Sarah, yeah, you got it. Sarah has a question.
What advice do you have for developing successful and productive professional leave? And how do you suggest reaching out to potential collaborators and hosts in other countries? Well, I had this really outstanding professional leave planned and I had a collaborator in Egypt I was going to work with, and then COVID hit. So my professional leave took a different turn, but I still had a good professional leave. I've been fortunate enough to have 3 sabbaticals at this point. One, because, you know, when you're in your career forever, I'm avoiding the word saying when you're old, but when you're in your career a long time, you've had more opportunities. And because I've had my career at WSU, if you move around a lot, it's harder to get those sabbaticals in, because you're not going to move to a place and they'll say, oh, we'll give you a sabbatical now that you've been here a year. That you tend to have to wait and start your sabbatical clock over. So that's a real advantage of finding a place you enjoy and staying there. The professional leave proposals, I waited till I was at a really good time that I had a lot of data, and I knew I had like more than I could analyze during the 40% of my time that's already research, right? Because you want, it's got to be not business as usual. That's one of the things they say. So it tended to be at the end of funding where we have all these data collected. And if I could work in analysis during my regular research hours, but I have so much to go beyond that, and a clear plan for what I wanted to do that was way beyond what I could do during a regular workday. I also had one sabbatical where I needed to do really intense data collection, and that data collection had grown beyond the original plans. That there was my second sabbatical, I ended up in schools 60 days of the school year. I couldn't have done that, not on sabbatical, but I would also say that was my least successful sabbatical because I wore myself ragged. I had multiple projects going on, looping back to James's question. So my advice there is don't overplan, because part of the point for sabbatical is stepping back and having that time for introspection and that deeper thinking. And I overplanned and was just running ragged. And then in terms of the international collaborator, it was the same thing. We started working together. We actually worked together on a USAID proposal that others on the screen were part of. And it did not get funded. But from there, I said, you know, even if we don't get funded, would you be interested in continuing this kind of work? Because even if we don't get the funding for me to go there, I think I could go there and spend time for my sabbatical if you could support. And I wrote a Fulbright and was accepted as a Fulbright specialist. So that was my plan, to get some funding to do that work, the Fulbright specialist program. But Sarah, I know you know a lot about Fulbrights too. So that can be a good source. But I'd say the bigger thing with international collaborators, and Dave just had one and worked with some folks in Finland, is starting early. You're probably not going to start that conversation at the same time you're writing proposal. I would say start a year or two ahead of when you think you're going to submit your proposal, to really get some good ideas together. Because and I don't need to tell you this either, Sarah, the project has to be something you both are interested in and you both will benefit from. You can't say, I want to come to Sweden and do this. Will you let me do that? That's not a good partnership. So that takes time. So, you know, all the things you probably would think about doing anyway. But I mean, the big theme on all of this is allow time. This kind of relational work where you're really going to form a strong partnership can't just happen when you want it to. You've got to look for opportunities and build those collaborations over time. James said, how do I work with collaborators different from, like for example, collaborating with science ed folks? I actually don't consider science ed folks outside of my field. My RA position was in a math and science ed project, and a little secret, I could have been certified to teach science, but I didn't like setting up labs, so I never got that certification. I wanted to stay with teaching math. So I don't consider science ed folks outside of my field, but I don't know, Dave, I think we're collaborating with folks further outside of our field right now with the project we're on, because they're like, Dan Goldhaber is an economist and he just focuses on teaching as he's a labor economist and focuses on teaching as his area. So I find that's more of a reach outside of the field, certainly, than science ed folks. But how do you collaborate? You read some in their journals, you listen, you don't make assumptions, you say, how are you thinking about this? And you still run into issues at times like, oh, I didn't understand that's where you're coming from, but you talk through it. But Dave, you want to add anything on that one? Because you've done a lot of collaboration outside too.
I'll just add a 30-second story. One of the ARAs, I don't remember if it was last one or 2 years ago, but Amy and I were presenting, actually she was presenting part of our work. And I remember talking with Amy after the session saying, this is kind of a whole AERA that we've never been exposed to, because it was presenters, it was literature, it was research that was, I wouldn't say brand new, but it was quite different than the kind of work both Amy and I had done before. So yeah, that one really was a right turn for both of us, I think, in our trajectories.
And I mean, I think the biggest thing is humility, right? We're not going into it saying, oh no, your field's way wrong. We're going into it with humility that, oh my, they look at it a different way. What can we learn from that? And what do we need to question about our own ways of looking at it? And where do we need to be helpful and help them to understand our ways, even if they're not going to take on our perspectives? We all have to understand each other's perspectives. And fundamentally, that's about academic scholarly humility to me. Same with qual and quant folks. And I've had the pleasure I didn't even talk about methodology in these, but the last 3 have been mixed methods projects. And the biggest gift has been we've all had humility on both sides and not dismissing what the other was bringing, but realizing the quant folks are bringing data and analysis to it that give evidence that I can't give, as are we in the qualitative side. And it's far more powerful to bring these ideas together. And the mixed methods part's really interesting, where we're really trying to say, how does one inform the other? Really great questions. Thank you.
Do we have time for one more? Since
I think so.
One of the organizers, I'll say we have time. You talked about the Common Core. I can't remember what project that was, Amy, but
that was number 3.
Okay. So that I got from what you said, that was a sort of a contextual factor for the teaching of mathematics.
Yeah.
And I'd wonder what you think about some of the other contextual factors, because we in cultural studies always talk about that kind of thing, sort of, standardized tests, teaching to the test, blue ribbon panels, like No Child Left Behind. How do they impact teaching of mathematics? And then sort of branching out to what people do about collaborating. How do you work with teachers to try to understand how that's affecting them?
Well, I mean, it's interesting you say that, AG, and I think there's an argument to be made that all of my projects are driven by a contextual factor. And for this one, it was Common Core. For the others, it's very much students' language and culture and lived experiences how do we teach math in the context that assigns strength to and highlights the value of students' language, culture, and community-based experiences. But this one, yeah, we basically said, how do teachers navigate their job in this era of the Common Core? And part of it became the era of testing, even though the Common Core itself didn't push the testing agenda. As soon as we had it, the testing companies and national policy said, oh, great, now we have a common curriculum of a sort, we can design tests much better, right? So that became infused with it. But some of the other things that you mentioned, I don't think have come into play. But I think that's one way you could sort of encapsulate my work over time is the teaching and learning of mathematics in really important contexts in which teachers work and students learn. But I don't know if I've answered your question.
Oh, you have, and you've led me to other thoughts. Thanks so much.
I know folks have to go, and I so appreciate your time. I'm really just really honored that this many people, like, I don't know. Yes. I'm at the point in my career, I think my time's like working with teachers and what makes the biggest difference at this point. And but I'm really honored people came, and I'm glad to talk more and continuing conversations later.
On that note, we want to say thank you so very much, Amy. Thanks a lot for this excellent presentation. And what a great turnout. You're right, Amy, to have this many colleagues come out.
It's a big turnout, Amy.
Yeah, so thank you so very much to our faculty and graduate students and staff for being here this afternoon. Thank you, and we look forward to the next research conversation. Thanks, Amy.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amy. It was very useful.
Oh, thanks, Laura.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.